So we have quite a crew today. It's very exciting. We're going to start to be respectful of everybody's time. Welcome and happy Mediation Week. I'm Susan North. And happy first day of spring. It's the spring equinox, which makes this kind of a special fun day. And happy Nowruz if you celebrate Nowruz this week. It's really a pleasure to introduce our panelists. We put together a really exciting group of people. We have four mediators, Leila Balakane, Jamie Fosgate, Barb North, and Marvin Whistler. And to shed a unique light on the topic, we have invited a psychologist, Dr. Mona Shinasa-Tubian. So welcome to our panelists, and thank you for participating today. I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot to talk about. It's a big topic and we only have an hour. So our first question for the panelists is, what makes parenting mediation different from fighting over custody in court? I think the question is sort of what distinguishes the two processes from each other. Barb, I saw a hand.
Yes, well, the biggest difference when you're in a conflict, you have four choices. You can live with it, you can leave, you can sit down and talk about it, either just the parties that are involved or with a neutral facilitator, or you can turn everything over to someone who tells you what to do. And that's what happens in court. There is a judge telling you how everything is going to be resolved. When you're in mediation, it's a collaborative situation. It's not a court. The mediator is not a judge. The mediator is there to help you communicate, because each person in a conflict, the members of the conflict know the answers. They know them deep in their hearts. And it's our job to help you get in touch with those things. So a mediation is a very comfortable environment. Since COVID, a lot more mediations are on Zoom, but they can also be in person. And everyone gets a chance to speak. The ground rules are try not to interrupt each other, and everyone gets to feel comfortable and hear each other, rather than a judge hearing everyone and making a decision. So that's one of the very comfortable ways to do that. And that leaves the humanity in it. It gives you the opportunity to preserve whatever is left of the relationship. Instead of doing battle, you're working together for the sake of your children, who are the most important parts, because you're going to be parents for life, whether you're divorcing or not.
True enough. Any other thoughts on that? Marvin, thanks. Thanks, Barb.
Yes, thanks, Barb. And I think what's very important to understand is that the whole process is based on conflict. So when you file for divorce, you're actually creating conflict, because you have to file for a litigation, file for a lawsuit. So it's built in, and attorneys are obliged to help in that process ethically. According to their ethics, they must work in your best interest. And in order to do that, it becomes sort of a zero-sum game. And in mediation, that is exactly the opposite, as Barb described. It's exactly the opposite process.
Yes, Jamie, please.
A funny little demonstration I've done a long time ago, but which can be helpful sometimes to people in understanding how a court process is different from a mediation process. Mediation is you're the focus. What you want to say is the focus. Your concerns and goals and needs are the focus. You and the other party, the other parent, the other spouse. And the mediator's there to help you express your concerns and goals, listen to each other, craft agreements. Court is very different. Court is based upon evidence. We have a little thing called the evidence code. And many people don't understand that real court is not like Judge Judy. You don't go in, spew out everything that's bad about your spouse, and the judge believes that you're right and your spouse is wrong and you win. You have to have admissible evidence. And for many people, they write down what's important to them. They have their story to tell the court. Well, the judge isn't going to listen to all that. The judge is going to say, is it relevant? How much of it's relevant? Well, how much of it's admissible? How much of it can you authenticate? You know, is it prejudicial? And by the time you actually talk to the judge, they hear this much of your story. They don't get to hear all of this. And in mediation, we can hear all of this. So that's another drawback to going to court is people want to be heard. They want their day in court. Guess what? The judge probably isn't going to listen to everything you want to share.
Interesting point, Jamie, because even if something isn't evidentiary in the strict legal sense, the person there at the mediation wants to say it. They want to be heard and felt. And it's important to them to say it, and it's important that the other person acknowledge that they said it on some level. So even though it doesn't fit the strict legal definition of evidence. We all have our own evidence, don't we? We all have things we want to say and manifest and feel heard about, even though they don't fit a template, a legalistic template. Any other thoughts on this? Yes, Dr. Mona, thank you.
Purely from a psychological aspect, one of the reasons I really love working with mediators is because in any dynamic when there is a manager and a subordinate, or a principal and an agent of any kind, generally there is a conflict of interest, so to speak, whereas one person, the lawyer needs to have their own interest in mind as well, and they're not looking to find negotiation and mediate by giving up and also taking something, where needs are expressed and dialogued, and it really becomes more of a war versus the arena where I've worked with incredible mediators such as yourselves, and together it's about finding the optimal situation for first the children, which are often overlooked in a divorce because people are looking to divide resources or take as many resources as possible, like Marvin alluded to. It becomes very much about the scarcity mentality or the zero-sum game.
Yeah. And you shed some light and kind of connected with something Barb said, that the people in the mediation can get even more in a legalized situation, when they get lawyers and go to court. It makes their dispute even more conflictual. It adds fuel to the fire, whereas a mediation is sort of draws down that fire a little bit, or at least, it creates a situation where people feel safe and comfortable, and they can bring their whole self and problem solve, and keep control of their own wishes and wants and needs. Which,
Susie, also, a mediation tends to be much more transformative, in that when you're sitting down with someone, the environment is not tell us what's wrong with the other person. The environment is, where are we now? Can we preserve where we are now? The two of you are still talking to each other now. Can we preserve that for the welfare of your children, as well as the welfare of the relationship that you're all going to have for your entire life? So looking for that transformation that happens, oftentimes people are splitting up because their communication has broken down. And it is the mediator's job to help you communicate, to, in essence, translate for you, because the two parties may be speaking completely different languages. And oftentimes when people come into a mediation, they say, well, we have everything worked out except for the house. And what happens is your emotion goes into that one area, and we have the argument that I like to call the green lamp. Everything is fine except who gets the green lamp. Well, my parents gave it to us. Yeah, but it was for my birthday. And it all starts centering around that. And a mediator can help facilitate that. That's what we're trained to do, is facilitate patient, so that you're understanding each other, and you can kind of freeze the conflict right there and not have to go deeper into it, but to grow from that and look together. And that's what I earlier said, within every conflicting, within the conflicting parties are the answers. And that's the transformation that happens in a mediation when everyone speaks and is heard, and you begin to understand where the other person is coming from. There are situations where a mediation can heal the marriage. That isn't necessarily the goal. We're not here to say, stay together, but amazing things can happen in a mediation because understanding begins to happen. That can't happen very easily in a court.
I would like to add a little bit more to that. So, going to court with judges making those critical decisions about a child's life always strikes me as so impersonal. I mean, they're basing these life-changing judgments because they're relying on the lawyers, which influences their decisions about how the kids grow up. And this is where mediation shines because it brings the decision-making back to the parents and focuses on co-parenting relationship. And we all know the term custody itself, I know most mediators don't like, myself included, because it sounds like a fighting word, like like a possession of owning a property. So words can really influence our emotions and impact our relationships. So we try to use the term parenting plan instead of custody because, again, it helps reduce that interpersonal conflict because fighting words might make parents more upset and they want to argue more. So mediation shifts the narrative to focus on how each parent best supports their children's growth. Another area where mediation shines is raising parents' awareness and empowering them with information. I always remind the parents that one day your kids are going to grow up and tell you how the experiences of this time was for them. And you're going to spend most of your life knowing them as adults. What do you want to hear them tell you about this period? As mediators, we're not just helping parents navigate the present, we're also helping them lay groundwork for a lifetime. And we really want to prepare them to what it is to come after mediation.
That is a wonderful segue. Thank you, Layla. It's a wonderful segue to our next question, which is how does mediation offer a more child-centered approach to creating residential schedules, including holidays and vacations, compared to court decisions? Getting down to kind of specifics. Yes, Marvin.
Yes, I think to expand a bit on what was just said, Layla, and also Jamie, when you go to court, the court doesn't have time or the inclination to hear your story, your complete story. All they want to hear is what's relevant to the law, to what's relevant to the conflict that the court has created. So I think simply put, mediation does more for a child-centered approach to creating residential schedules, holidays, vacations, compared to court decisions, because parents know best. Because as difficult as it may be for them to agree as to what is best, they know their situation best. So the court coming up with, a visitation schedule, as they like to put it, or as we like to put it, a co-parenting schedule, they're simply using a rule of thumb or very minimal amount of information for that particular situation, that particular family. Those parents are living it, so they know what's going to work, even if they can't agree. And the mediator's job and the therapist and the psychologist's job is to help them to understand that they actually know best and to help them to actually come to a resolution that actually reflects that.
And in that way, you have the ability to create something that's very individual, unique, and tweaked to that family's specific needs, right, Marvin? I think
Yes,
so.
that's exactly it.
It can be as individual and quirky as the people in the family, and it suits them. I mean, the judge doesn't care that your mother-in-law can pick them up from school every other Monday. That's just not It's too minute, it's too precise, you know, but you know it and you
Exactly.
both know it. So, yeah.
Yes, that's it.
And we do get into very precise and very specific areas. You know, most of us work with a list, and you know, what about dental, and what about, oh, well, she's got the, you know, when you bring these kinds of things up, you know this about your children. You know what's going to work and what's not going to work. An interesting change that I've seen over the last few years is, you know, in court with holidays, often you'll talk about Christmas and Thanksgiving and, you know, kid's
Birthday.
birthday. Halloween has become a very big thing. That we would only have known through mediation when, well, you can have them for Christmas, but I want them for Halloween, those kinds of things, and working out ways together. I always ask that the parents bring pictures of the children to the mediation. And when we get off track, when we stop thinking of the children and start thinking of the fight, we can look back at those pictures and go, okay, but this is who we're talking about. These are the people that you have brought into the world that are going to be in the world probably, hopefully longer than you are. So let's focus on them. And that doesn't happen in a courtroom. That doesn't happen anywhere else. A mediation takes time, but a mediator is trained to take time, to do a lot of listening, and to help each party do a lot of listening. And to have the parties set ground rules together at the very beginning helps them learn how to collaborate. It helps, that's what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life with your children, is collaborating. Because, and then they're going to be adults, and they are, as Layla mentioned, going to give you feedback about how that all looked. And it has to be for their sake, because divorces, I mean, money can get involved, but, and does get involved, but divorces, for the most part, get the most complicated when there are children involved, because everyone has different feelings. And what you want to care about the most is that you haven't taken another parent away from that child, that you haven't alienated their other parent, because parents love, children love and need their parents. And whether you want to live with that person or not has nothing to do with whether that person needs to have a relationship with their children. So all of that is kept in mind in a very specific and very careful way in mediation.
Yes, Dr. Mona.
Very much in agreement with what Barb was just sharing. One of the things that I have seen happen over and over again is with the parents is that they do not only alienate the other parent, but they alienate the in-laws on both sides. And often one of the things that I find is the saving grace of most kids who go through traumatic incidents, and divorce is for sure a trauma, is that the couples who have not alienated grandparents on either side, the children come out unscathed because they often refer back and say, you know, it was my grandparents or my grandmother or a particular loving, you know, second, you know, member of the family that held a calm, peaceful space. And what I tell the parents is that they're trying to get back at each other by cutting you know, their children off from the other side. And the more the more people a child has in their life that they can trust and love at any given point throughout their life, that are genuinely people who will, you know, be there through the entirety of that child's life, the healthier that child becomes in terms of their perspective towards marriage and the world, and the ability, it's almost like a correlation with every additional person that child can trust and love. There is additional safeguards against the negative implications of life and the world that they may face. So I completely agree. And one of the things I've learned is that in the training of lawyers versus mediators is that lawyers are taught to not ask questions, not even open the door to their time being taken by something that, you know, may not contribute to the winning of that case. So they don't want to waste time opening the door to a vent session. So they're trained to not ask questions that they have answers to that may take their time, versus mediators are simply trained not to ask questions that they can't do anything about the answers to. So that is one of the things that fundamentally for me differentiates this process, because that is why I get twice as many referrals from mediators who may engage a little bit more in the Q&A process, get to know the couple better. And often there's an undiagnosed mental illness, or there's an undiagnosed, for example, adult ADHD is often the culprit in why people find themselves on my doorstep. And that is one of the underlying things that could easily be resolved between divorcing couples that has been misdiagnosed as narcissism or something that is not healable. So it's the mediator who is able to engage and then pull in the psychologist who does something about the answers, can ask the questions and can do something about the answers.
I know that all of you have had, and you touched on our third question, which is how can health professionals assist families in recognizing and addressing the emotional needs of children during the divorce mediation process? Do you have specific things, Dr. Mona, that you would say in answer to that? Like, it seems like a great idea to let kids have in addition to the wonderful family members like grandparents and aunties and uncles and all that, who could help bolster the children during a time that their parents are both pretty frazzled.
Yes.
How can a health professional help the family?
You know, obviously it's a much larger concept, and it's applicable to the particular situation. But if I were to answer that question by, you know, drawing an arc, it would be primarily that when people are going through the difficulties in their life, they fall back to their lowest operating mechanism. And when a person falls to their lowest operating mechanism, whatever has been unresolved, unhealed within them becomes the thing that they project onto the other. And they will often go blind in terms of their recognition of the fact that whatever is being projected is something that's emanating within themselves, that they have unresolved generational, like repetitive compulsions with. And one very well-known psychological fact that is astounding and very applicable is that we often marry our partner is a representation of the authority figure from our childhood that we have the most unresolved trauma with. So they reflect either, you know, the unresolved trauma we may have with our mother or father, or an older sibling. And sometimes the simple moment where a person who's going through these processes recognizes, you know, has the awareness, and what I call these light bulb moments, where they recognize that they are actually punishing a spouse for the unresolved traumas they've been through with their mother that were never healed, and they never made that connection. They really move back into this state of recognizing how much work they're capable of doing to save their family, save their marriage, and break these intergenerational traumas that are then passed down from generation to a generation. The second thing I would say is that when a person is operating from their lowest common denominator, they move very much into a place of total self-absorption to the inability to even recognize that there are children involved. They dehumanize the partner that they're seeking to divorce in really bad situations. And when they have the kind of support to do the kind of introspection they need to do, they can seriously recognize that using the child to get back at the spouse, or many of the other tactics that are so unfortunate that I think we've all seen. Again, it's an immediate, often one-time even session of bringing awareness to what's happening that can align that person to go back to the mediator and work towards something, that is going to be much less destructive in the end.
And there are a lot of ways that kids can get help during a divorce. They can have their own therapist if there's the resources for that, but also there are groups that kids can join where there's a therapist and maybe 10 or 12 kids who are going through something difficult and have an opportunity to, I think someone used the word vent, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing, but we think it's a good thing. And just have an opportunity to have a guided conversation about it that benefits a child who's confused and sad and whatever's going on for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And often, depending on the age of the child, the most difficult and sad part of it is that generally children under 7 or 8 years old, they don't have the ability yet to differentiate between what's happening as not being their fault. They internalize all of it as something that they did and that they were not able to heal, they weren't able to help, which really completely shifts the trajectory of that child's life.
Sure.
And furthermore, when a child is exposed to that kind of internalizing, which parents don't know about, then what happens also is that it actually changes the mental, there's brain scans that are done that shows that the thinking of the child is moved at an earlier age into plasticity, and they no longer have that ability to have that dynamic appreciation and growth that they would have otherwise been able to have.
Wow, that's amazing. The brain scans show this.
Yes, yes,
Wow.
yes.
Wow.
It's also very true that in mediation, you get into so much detail that you can't get into in any other environment as a group. With the what happens if, when you're ready to introduce a significant other, how are you going to handle that? How are you going to do that together? So that together you're coming up with, maybe, some couples say, if I'm going to introduce a significant other, I'm going to contact my former spouse first so that they can help with that process. Or we're going to bring in a mental health expert so they can help with that process, rather than just one day somebody shows up and is living with mom. So those kinds of things, we spend a lot of time in mediation discussing. How are you going to handle this? How are you going to handle that? What happens if somebody gets an out-of-state job? How do you want to look at that now? What is the distance that's comfortable for you to not have to reassess and go to, if you move an hour away, fine. If you move 2 hours away, fine. If you move to another state, what are you going to do? How are you going to address that? So that it's like a contract where things are in place while you're still getting along. And I know it sounds funny when you're getting divorced that you're still getting along, but obviously if you're in mediation, which is about 95% successful, if both parties want to mediate and can be getting along at least to that level, that's when you want to put everything in writing. Just like if you form a partnership with someone, that's when you want to put everything in writing, because you're fair to each other. It makes sense. And when you're constantly thinking about your kids while all of this conversation is going on, you're going to look at the future in a different way, and you're going to be able to prepare more for it.
Yes, yes, thank you. Marvin, you had your hand up, and then Jamie, I wanted to ask you if you had anything to add to that.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question of Mona. Something I've noticed in mediations, it seems just in general, parents are unaware of how divorce is affecting their children. They're just blind to it. Um, and the question I wanted to ask was, do you find that you're able to help them with that, to help them to come to the realization that there is a negative effect that's on their children?
I am a huge child advocate. I'm an advocate of anyone who can't advocate for themselves, and it is my primary concern, actually. I find that whenever you come from a certain background and you are educated in a certain way, you kind of assume that other people know at least a little bit about like the psychological arena or and it's untrue. It's very surprising to me that most parents don't know about child psychology. They don't know the developmental timeline and how emotions, the emotions of a young, for example, 7 or 8 year old, actually it can't even understand or hold the heaviness of a child at 13 and so on. And so to gain a little bit of just education really goes a tremendous way in helping the parent move out of that triangle of feeling fully victimized by the situation they're going in and falling into themselves in a way where they think everybody else is a periphery. And that's generally what I find is that people feel like they're in so much pain that they really become quite emotionally neglectful of the fact that there's a lot of people being impacted. With every family that falls apart, it impacts everyone associated with each one of those people, but primarily the children. So just sharing the little facts, the scientific facts of how trauma at various ages impacts the neurology and capacity, like forever, of that human being is something that really shakes, is one of many things that I like sharing that shakes a parent into consciousness and the ability to be present in understanding how them as an adult and how they're processing pain is very different than the entire worldview that the child is building, that it'll be limited view of the world ongoing for the rest of their life.
Right. Jamie, do you have anything to add, especially in terms of like centering the child in this process, centering the child or children?
I do find that some parents choose mediation because they are children of divorce and they
Mm,
know what they experienced when their parents were fighting in court, and they don't want their own children to experience what they experienced. So some people come to the mediation process with that background, which is
wow, yeah.
helpful. Um, I don't know if Mona's going to mention this at any point, but I know there's ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And there's a questionnaire, and depending upon what adverse childhood experiences people have had, it impacts their health and the rest of their lives. And so maybe if you have parents who aren't children of divorce and don't understand what it's like to be a kid going through divorce, if you can show them this questionnaire and say, these are the kind of things that impact your child, and as you're going to be going through this divorce, keep some of these things in mind. There's also the documentary Split. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. It's where the 10 or 12 or 14 young children, well, children of various ages from 4 or 5 to, 10, 11, 12 were interviewed about what it was like going through their children's or their parents' divorce. And that can be very eye-opening for parents to watch a film like that, to hear kids in their child's situation expressing what's going on. So I think those are
Yeah.
some areas where helping parents get an awareness of maybe how this is impacting their kids, some tools they might be able to use, and parents going through a co-parenting class or their own parent support group, therapy group, and hearing from the other parents and getting that professional input, since many people have never been divorced before and have never been single parents before. And so not being ashamed or afraid to say, I need some help, I need some education.
That's great. Thank you. And since we're sharing resources, I just want to shout out a book that I thought was wonderful. It's Isolina Ricci's book, Mom's House, Dad's House. And she has a workbook for teens and a workbook for younger kids that accompany the book. And it's very comprehensive. In the back of the book, she has, her last name is Ricci, R-I-C-C-I. And I think she's both a psychologist and a mediator, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, don't quote me on that. But anyway, it's a fabulous book. It's very useful. And it's a good thing for parents to read just so they can start thinking about the many, many, many things that will need to be hashed out. She has a list in the back of everything you could, Barbara mentioned the dentist and the what if a future, mapping out the future kind of questions as well as settling things for the present. And Layla, you said something so great about that they're going to remember how this went down. They are going to, how this goes is going to be part of their life and their memory set for the rest of time.
I would like to share some fascinating insight that a colleague of mine, Don Spoznik, he's a clinical psychologist, and he has observed over the years. And it really changed how I understand the dynamic of when people want to get divorced. And this concept of non-mutual decision to divorce. Because with divorce, there's an emotional process, right? And it can impact our mediation in a significant way. So there was a study done that focused, this was mainly on heterosexual relationships. So imagine these two timelines where usually it's the statistically they've done this research, it shows 70% are the wives and they seek to discuss the marital issues and such as counseling, but the husband dismisses her concern saying, honey, I'm okay, you seem to be with the problems, I don't want to go to therapy. And over time, what happens is the wife starts to move towards the divorce, and she's now at the point of indifference. And she's no longer invested in a relationship with him. And the husband remains oblivious and is now confronted with this reality. So what happens is the husband is now at point zero emotionally, and the wife is emotionally a year ahead. And now the children also going to have their needs met during this turbulent time. And the wife is at the point that she wants to get divorced. She's pushing for divorce to happen. And the husband still, again, as a point zero, completely different emotional process. That's why it gets to be non-mutual decision, which is the reason for majority of cases that end up in litigation. So what the implications are in mediation for us as mediators to tell the wife, slow down, and then we encourage the husband to go to therapy and cope with the reality. And hopefully in the process, the therapist can help support and provide him with coping strategies to deal with it. And after the therapy, what happens? He can come back to mediation, and now we can get them closer to the middle of these two timelines. And we now have what's called mutual decision to separate, and it's no longer this non-mutual decision. And the approach, it not only facilitates a more mindful, but potentially saves them money, and also helps promote healing and growth, which you can't get that when you're in litigation. But the most important, crucial part of this is that therapists are indirectly addressing the children's emotional needs by improving the parents' emotional health and coping mechanism.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. And thank you for bringing up money, because we've been talking on a very elevated aspirational plane because we love that. We're mediators. But mediation is going to save the family a bundle. And you really, it has to be said that if there's, this life is about to change a lot. There's going to be two different households. Things are about to get very different and very expensive. And so any money they can save, as opposed to litigating, will be money well spent that they can still continue to have piano lessons or maybe have a little vacation with each parent and the children or something like that. It makes it less disruptive if everybody's not broke at the end of the process. Yes, Marvin, thank you.
Yes, in addition to that, the other benefit of saving the money is quite frequently when parents are going through this divorce, because they become so stretched financially, it makes it difficult for the children because they cannot do what they need to do for the children. They cannot provide adequate housing. They cannot, just everything. You can just go down the list. It becomes very difficult to do any of that. And I spoke with a couple not long ago, a few months ago, and they couldn't move ahead with divorce because they didn't have enough money. They could not function in two separate households. So they have to stay together.
Mm. Wow.
The other thing is the power dynamic that happens. And often, and Layla pointed out, when one person wants to separate and the other doesn't, or isn't aware of that, there are so many power dynamics that happen between couples. And in mediation, the playing field is leveled. You don't get to use your power or abuse your power.
We talk about power balancing a lot. It's a
Yes.
big feature
And
of mediation.
yeah, and so both parties are equal in mediation. They everybody has the same amount of time to talk, which is as much as they need. And we go into, we set an agenda together. Each person has a say in that agenda. And so so you're in an environment where it isn't like, well, you're making the money, so you get to decide, or you're the one that always decides with the kids, or there's an opportunity for everyone to participate in a way that is fair. And oftentimes that wasn't going on in the marriage. And so it can now go on after the marriage.
And after the marriage, there's so much that can be done in mediation. For example, I've done tune-ups with families. You know, a parenting plan for a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old is very different than a 14 and a 16-year-old. And so it's, just as they outgrow their toys and their books and their clothing, they also can outgrow a parenting plan by going back to the mediator. The mediator knows the people well and can sort of grow the parenting plan along with the family and the changes that have happened with the two families, sort of, and help them stay current so that the kids' current needs are being met maybe 10 years from now or what have you. And that's an important piece too. Talk a little bit about strategies for maintaining co-parenting relationships. How do you, in mediation, help them with how they're going to communicate with each other going forward from this day on? What are some of the techniques you use? Marvin?
First of all, a very detailed co-parenting plan, something that's not much is left to chance. I know you can't be perfect, perhaps, but frequently parents will get to a point where they can't move any further easily. And then they say, well, we'll work it out. Well, that's fine in the moment, but they never work it out. And they end up in a big conflict again. And they come back to the mediator. Well, hopefully they come back to the mediator because they have found, that they cannot work it out. So it's very important to have a detailed co-parenting plan in place when they go into the co-parenting situation, something that they haven't done before, as someone mentioned before, and it makes it a lot easier for them. And that will help maintain a healthy relationship between them.
Yes, Layla.
I just want to add to that. What happens if you have co-parents, they just really can't work together and they have a very difficult time to communicate. It's called correlate parenting, and it's adopted by highconflict.net if anyone is interested. But
It's called what parenting? Can you say that again? Sorry.
Parallel co-parenting.
Parallel parenting, yes.
And it's really about the couple to disengage from one another. So it's really reserving the conversation only for urgent issues. Like they can use email or text, but there are free co-parenting apps. I believe Talking Parents or Cozy. And then, when there is a significant decision, it's communicated. It's not as we're going to have a conversation. You're just informing them that this is what's going to happen. And, you know, each parent is going to make decisions regarding the kids, their own parenting time. For example, you can tell the kids, you know, we each have our own special ways that we do things, and that's okay. So that is more parallel co-parenting, and it's not ideal, but if it's only if it's really difficult for parents having a difficulty communicating with each other.
The nice thing about the apps, there's Our Family Wizard and Talking Parents, and you mentioned a different one that I'm not aware of, Layla. You're talking to a robot, and you know that you're talking to a robot, and the person you're talking to knows that they're hearing from a robot. So it really reduces the opportunity for overinterpreting a message. Well, that was kind of brusque, you know, or, oh, she's always so snarky, or, you know, what does that question really mean? I mean, it sort of neutralizes talk into a very sort of cut and dried robotic, you know, can I change the pickup time from 3 to 4 on Friday? You know, it's like really basic, devoid of any snark or any sarcasm or any, it's not subject to interpretation. It's a robot talking to a robot. And that sometimes helps too,
Yeah,
in cases where it's really, really hard. Yes, Marvin. And then Mark.
Yeah, yes, and as far as you know, the parenting on separately is basically what Layla is talking about. But I find that elements of that are in most of my co-parenting plans, because people are in mediation when they're in divorce because they're disagreeing and they cannot come together. So there are elements of that perhaps in most situations. So I understand the idea, and it's wonderful if people can make it work. But when people are at that level of conflict, frequently they can't do that.
Yeah. We have to remember that they're there because of conflict. I think Dr. Moni, you had your hand up, and then
Okay,
Jamie.
that's okay. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Jamie, go ahead.
All right. So,
Thanks.
I was just going to say that another way besides the co-parenting apps and taking co-parenting classes, so you can learn how to co-parent with your co-parent as single parents. Sometimes I think it's helpful for parents to realize that there are going to be times when they have to set aside their adult ego and put their children's needs first. And it doesn't mean you're showing weakness or that you're giving in and the other parent's winning and you're losing. It's stop and think. I don't like this. This is what they're suggesting. However, that's my adult ego. Let me think about this from my kids' point of view. Is this really better for my kids? And sometimes you have to set aside your adult needs and wants and concerns and focus on, okay, is this best for the kids? And regardless of how, even if my ex interprets it as they're winning and I'm losing, I don't care, because at the end of the day, I can see this is better for my kids.
And a skillful mediator can kind of put into effect that pivot by redirecting the conversation, by taking out, Barb talked about the pictures. Let's get real. This is about the kids. These are the, you know, the primary people we're here to talk about today. A skillful mediator does all of that to keep the kids front and center. I want to make a public service announcement that if you or anyone you know is divorcing, it's a great idea to see a mediator before you tell the kids. You will not have worked out all the details, but it's a better conversation. And we're going to talk a little bit about that conversation with kids before we close. But if you have a little bit of information under your belt that you can share with children, children are very concrete thinkers, especially the younger ones. I see Dr. Mona nodding. And they really like information. They really do. They will feel better about everything if they know what Monday's going to look like, you know, and you can be as specific as possible. Be saying we're getting divorced and it's going to be really different, and then just ending the conversation there is not only scary, but it's upsetting to children because they just have no, like, what is my future going to look like? You know, who's going to make my oatmeal in the morning? So I think having that conversation with the mediator before you talk to children is a really good start. You won't have worked out all the details, but you'll have something concrete to share about how Monday's going to look. Any thoughts about conversations about, I'm sure some of you have guided. Yes, Dr. Moon.
I couldn't agree more. The worst, generally the number one thing that creates childhood anxiety is a child's lack of ability to predict the future and a chaotic environment. So if a child lives in an environment where one day there's fighting, one day there's peace, one day mom's taking care of them, but they don't know whether it's mom or dad. One day it's dad. That's generally the thing, and much lesser than that leads to childhood and anxiety. And so very much I support this idea of not telling the children, not involving the children, for the benefit of the child, to put on a face for as long as one needs to, because the sitting kids down and telling them, having this difficult conversation with them should definitely be something that's guided by, professionals. There's so many ways of limiting the impact and the trauma, and taking steps in ways that are include the child, so the child feels like they have some level of control over their own decisions and choices, really limits the damage in significant ways. And even that is done through, an arc, right? That anybody who's kind of trained in dealing with these situations can guide a parent through. Yeah, so I wanted to definitely highlight that.
So designing that conversation could be something the mediator could help the two parents with, even before they have that conversation.
Absolutely. And it really does go back to the relinquishment of like personal egos, which a parent generally will only do if it's for their child, and generally not for any other reason. And also moderating these power dynamics that people feel they need to, that's the first thing that a person thinks when the word divorce is brought into play. The first thing they think is they need to suit up, and this is time to go to war. And so when a mediator is aware of these things and is able to bring them back into this balance of power, and allowing them to understand that at any point in time when they are in this power dynamic, that all they're doing is negatively impacting the children and the long-term impact of their relationship, it's something that really makes the most, I think, the biggest impact on mediating.
Right, right. Marvin, you had a thought?
Yes, before we close, there's a message from Kendall Evans
Oh, yes.
in the chat indicating that he or she cannot see her name or his name on the computer screen, and there's a question for Mona and myself.
Okay, I see that as well. I have a question regarding parent education. Okay,
Is Kendall Evans still here?
let us know, Kendall, if you're here. I mean, I think we touched on parent education as part of the therapeutic process a little bit after he posed that question.
Here we go.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
he or she might have to type in their question in the chat. I'm not sure we can give them the ability to talk.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kendall, could you write your question?
Yes, actually, Kendall responded that
It's the community, yes.
he's going to answer.
The other thing to remember is you're the grown-ups and they're the kids. And your job is the kids, okay?
They
And
need to be reminded,
the
right?
kids don't need to hear your beefs with their other parent. What is the goal? What is the goal if you're going to make cracks about your father is this or your mother is that?
Well
What are
taken.
you trying
Well
to
taken.
accomplish? So thinking that through before that happens, we all want to badmouth the person that we're mad at. But the
Being a
place to
grown-up
do
is a big part of
Yeah.
it. Barb, I just wanted, Kendall has put the, and that's a great point, thank
Yeah.
you. Kendall has put the question, when one parent contacts you to express an interest in
That's someone
mediation
else
and their ex
asking a
is not
question.
interested.
Kendall's is below that one. That's Ron Burglass.
Yes,
Oh, I'm
you're
so
right.
sorry, you are
So we
so
can maybe
right.
do Kendall's first
Thank
and
you
then
for
come back to
catching it.
Ron's?
Possibly, if time allows. Sorry, Ron. Is there a short form that parents can receive or a summary of the impacts of divorce on child psychology? I've tried getting them to watch Ms. Bruno's film Split and have also assigned readings. The ACEs study too is too comprehensive for them. So maybe something real short and sweet that will, are you aware of any resources that would be good?
Honestly, if you know, the documentary is the best idea. Generally through film, people are impacted greatest, I find. But I also think that when people think a psychologist, they think it has to be this long-term process. Whereas often in, you know, a one hour session or 1 2 hour session, the parents can be educated according to their own personal case in a way
Mhm.
that alerts them to the road ahead and gives them the information they need in terms of how they, you know, because again, it is about the developmental timeline of the child and where the child's at. There's different information and different studies that impact it. So, I mean, sometimes just knowing that even having a one-time educational and you know, kind of session would
Mhm.
bring both people to a place where they understand what is in this for them, because that's probably where they're at in that moment, and how this will positively impact the
Right.
children.
That's right. But you know, we should we should be looking for these kind of short, quick, concise ways of letting parents know the difference of all the stuff we've talked about today, but in kind of a compact form. There's another last question. When one parent contacts you to express, whoops, an interest in mediation and their ex is not interested, first, what are your responsibilities? And two, how do you get the other party to the table?
Well,
Mhm.
um, first of all, it's a voluntary process, and they have to be willing to be open enough to actually consider the other party's point of view. Even if they come to you saying, I don't think this is going to work. Um, the best thing I have found is just to ask them to give it a chance and explain to them the process and how we will work together and how we will, you know, we're able to ask questions of each other and clarify things. And generally speaking, after I've spoken with them in that manner, then they're willing to at least consider the process. Some people are just in a different place, as Layla mentioned earlier. Some people are just not ready yet to come to mediation or anything else regarding the divorce. And so that's why they're resistant. And maybe they don't even realize that. But if you can keep the conversation open, there is a good chance that they will eventually come to you. I mean, I've had people inquire about mediation in March, and I hear from them in October.
Mhm.
So it's a long process.
Percolation.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just percolation. I need to wrap things up, even though this is so interesting and there's so much going on. But on behalf of all the children who will directly benefit from the wisdom that you people have shared today, I want to really thank you for participating. It's just been wonderful, and I thank you very, very much. And that ends our meeting. Thank you so much.
Yeah.